okay? No. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanacharya Yamunatira Vanacharya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Brajajana Yamunatira Vanacharya Yamunatira Vanacharya Shri Radha Govinda Deva ki Srila Prabhupada ki Gopremanande Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya We are reading today from the Srimad Bhagavatam, the third canto, chapter 3, entitled The Lord's Pastimes Out of Vrindavan. Today we are taking a look at text number 28. Anam chorurasam tebhyo Tattva Bhagavatarpanam Govi Prartha Savashura Pranemur Bhuvi Murdabe Anam Chorurasam Tebhyo Dattva Bhagavatarpanam Govri Partha Savashura Prane Murabhuvi Murdabi Anam Chorurasam Tevyo Dadva Bhagavadarpanam Govi Prartha Savashura Prane Murabhuvi Murdabi. Please repeat. Anam Chorurasam Tevyo Dhatva Bhagavadarpanam Govri Prartha Savashura Prane Murabhuvi Murdabi Anam Chorurasam Tevyo Dhatva Bhagavadarpanam Govri Prartha Savasura Prane Murabhuvi Murdabi Anam Chorurasam Tebhyo Dhatva Bhagavatarpanam Govri Prartha Savasura Prane Murabhuvi Murdabi Anam foodstuffs Cha also Ururasam highly delicious Tebhya unto the Brahmanas Dadva after supplying Bhagavat Arpanam which was first offered to the personality of Godhead. Go cows Vipra Brahmanas Artha purpose Asava purpose of living Shura all the valiant Kshatriyas Pranemo offered obeisances Bhuvi touching the ground Murdabi with their heads. Thereafter they offered the Brahmanas highly delicious foodstuffs first offered to the personality of Godhead and offered their respectful obeisances by touching their heads to the ground. They lived perfectly by protecting the cows and Brahmanas. Purport. The behavior exhibited by the descendants of Yadu in the pilgrimage site of Prabhas was highly cultured and exactly to the point of human perfection. The perfection of human life is attained by following three principles of civilization: protecting the cows, maintaining the Brahminical culture, and above all, becoming a pure devotee of the Lord. Without becoming a devotee of the Lord, one cannot perfect one's human life. The perfection of human life is to be elevated to the spiritual world, where there is no birth, no death, no disease, no old age. That is the highest perfectional aim of life. Without this aim, any amount of material advancement and so-called comforts can only bring the defeat of the human form of life. Brahmanas and Vaishnavas do not accept any foodstuff which is not first offered to the personality of Godhead. Foodstuff offered to the Lord is accepted by the devotees as the mercy of the Lord. After all, the Lord supplies all kinds of foodstuff, both to the human being and to other animals. A human being must be conscious of the fact that all foodstuffs, namely grains, vegetables, milk, water, etc., the prime necessities of life, are supplied for mankind by the Lord. And such foodstuffs cannot be manufactured by any scientist or materialist in a laboratory or factory established by human effort. The intelligent class of men are called Brahmanas, and those who have realized the absolute truth in a supreme personal feature are called Vaishnavas. But both of them accept foodstuffs which are the remnants of sacrifice. Sacrifice is ultimately meant to satisfy the Yajna Purusha, Vishnu. In Bhagavad Gita it is said that one who accepts foodstuffs as the remnants of sacrifice is freed from all sinful reactions, and one who cooks foodstuffs for maintenance of his body takes in all kinds of sins, which lead only to suffering. The foodstuffs prepared by the Yadus at the Prabhas pilgrimage site to offer to the bona fide Brahmanas there were all offered to the personality of Godhead Vishnu. The Yadus offered their sincere obeisances by touching their heads to the ground. The Yadus, or any enlightened family in Vedic culture, are trained for attainment of human perfection by total cooperation of service between the different divisions of social orders. The word Uru Rasam is also significant here. Hundreds of delicacies can be prepared simply by the combination of grains, vegetables, and milk. All such preparations are in the mode of goodness and therefore may be offered to the personality of Godhead. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord accepts only foodstuffs which are within the range of fruits, flowers, leaves, and liquids, provided they are offered in complete devotional service. Devotional service is the only criterion for a bona fide offering to the Lord. The Lord assures that he positively eats such foodstuffs offered by the devotees. So judging from all sides, the Yadus were perfectly trained, civilized persons, and their being cursed by the Brahmana sages was only by the desire of the Lord. The whole incident was a warning to all concerned that no one should behave lightly with Brahmanas and Vaishnavas. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumritam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vanshakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindubhya evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Srivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we see here how the Yadus were as Prabhupada says, they were exactly to the point of human perfection. So you see, Vedic culture is based around three things: the protection of the cows, the maintenance of the Brahminical culture, and then above all the cultivation of pure devotional service. The Brahmanas are the most important, the Brahmanas and the cows, for two reasons. The Brahmanas are the repository of religious principles. Principles cannot be taught or disseminated in society simply based on theory or logic. It can only be taught by a person who is living those principles. So the Brahmanas, therefore, they abide by the principles of dharma, austerity, compassion, truthfulness, and purity to a much higher degree, to the complete degree in one sense. And that's the definition of a Brahmana. The higher level of Brahmana means the more and more completely he abides by these principles. But these principles, they cause complications in life. It's not easy to do it. You have to sacrifice quite a bit. So we see that Brahmanas, the traditional Vedic Brahmana, he would always live in poverty. Because whatever he receives in charity, he gives away in charity. And in that way he keeps himself pure. He doesn't get entangled by greed or entangled by an over-endeavor for material things. You see in Maharashtra, you see Chanakya Pandit, a famous example of an advisor to a Maharaj, which is named Chandragupta. And we see that Chanakya Pandit, even though he was the advisor of a king, he voluntarily lived in poverty. He voluntarily lived very simple. And whatever was given to him by the king, all the facility, he would give it away. And that way, the Brahmana can be trusted, because the Brahmana, he doesn't want anything from you, because he's not interested in moving forward, making lots of money. So you can trust a person like that, specifically when it comes to giving people, helping them. So the Brahmana, he would receive and then he would distribute to wherever it is required. Similarly, you see a Brahminical person is also not supposed to be entangled in politics, because politics necessarily mean duplicity, where you hide what you really want and you say something else. But because the Brahmana is living simple, and because he is not interested in taking more and more for himself, therefore he can just be very honest. He can just be very honest and straightforward. He doesn't have to hide or doesn't have to do anything dubious to manipulate people. So in this way, brahmanas can therefore be trusted by everyone in society. And the brahmanas then, they are able to teach other people religious principles. Religious principles are in the material world consistently under attack. The material world is always attacking our principles, because all these principles are based on, they can only be maintained by a certain sacrifice has to be made. One has to sacrifice for religious principles. And your sacrifice will, or your principles will regularly be tested. You see, if you take a vow, for us, we take our vow of 4 regulative principles, these vows will be tested throughout life, so many different ways. And the thing with the material world also is that there's always a grey area, like a grey area. For example, we see no gambling, and we know very clearly what that means. Okay, no gambling. But then there's like this whole grey area in between, like Bitcoin. Is it gambling? Is it not gambling? It's a little unclear. Certain kinds of investments, like nowadays, the modern financial market has become, it's not the same. It's like something, a new creation, one could say. And it's not always clear, is it gambling, is it not gambling? How is it? So the Brahmana, he stays away. He doesn't even go into the grey zone. He just takes a step back. The other Varnas, they might wiggle something different out there. The Vaishya, for example, is allowed to lie to make a profit. Because Prabhupada explains that the Vaishya has to lie. Because the whole basis of making a profit in one sense is lying. You're selling something for more than you bought it for. So you take something that has a certain value and then you sell it for more than it's worth, and that's how you make your living. So therefore the Vaishya is entangled in a different kind of life. Same thing with so many things. Illicit sexual relationships, we see, okay, it's very clear. But then in the modern world, for example, not so uncommon for unmarried men and women to live together. So in the traditional world, that just wasn't allowed, because that's a very dangerous thing to do. So within the modern world, you have to decide, how far are you going to go to protect your principles? So every devotee has to ask that question. How will we, whatever the principles are that you follow, these principles will be under attack. And the biggest thing that attacks our principles is what one can call the expedient, or sometimes what is practical. Sometimes these principles, they don't always look very practical. But that is a very dangerous thing. And the Brahmana, for example, he chooses principles over anything else. And therefore he protects principles. But therefore the Brahmana needs to be protected. Because if you have people who live according to this principle, they need someone to protect them also. So that's the interesting thing, how the Brahmanas and the cows, they are the most important elements in society, but they are also the most vulnerable. Because the Brahmana is not making lots of money to secure his own security in life. He's just living a life of sacrifice. So therefore he needs protection. So we see that the Varnas work in such a way that each of the lower Varnas, they have to be protected, or in one sense live within the boundaries of the higher Varna, and they have to serve the higher Varna. For example, the Brahmana, they are setting the principles of Dharma within which the Kshatriyas have to follow. The Kshatriyas have to abide by the principles of the Brahmanas. Then the Kshatriyas, they implement these values in the forms of laws and regulations, which they then enforce, and which the Vaishyas then have to function within. The Vaishyas have to be controlled by the Kshatriyas, because the Vaishyas, they have an unsatiable desire for profit, and they will sacrifice anything to make profit. And then we see that's what's happening in the modern world. So many horrible things are happening. And it's not that people want it to happen, but they want to make a profit, and then they can't stop. Like how many animals we are killing. It's not because they necessarily want to be cruel to animals. It's just because you can make a lot of money. It's simple. If you have a big factory and you have thousands of animals in there, and you put them all in a little cage, and you just kill them when they're young, and you just pump them full of hormones so that they grow very quickly. It's not because they have that they want to be cruel to the animals necessarily. It's just because it's profit. You can make more profit. If you give them a smaller space and you force them to grow faster, you can make more profit at the end. So we see that the Vaishya spirit, which is in one sense natural, like it's explained, the Vaishya has a natural, unsatiable desire for profit. So that's fine if you have that desire, but it has to be curbed. It has to be curbed by the administrators. And we see that that's what the government, mostly, that's a big job of the government, is to control this thing, to say, no. It's okay, you can have your profit, but you can't do this. This is not allowed. You see in so many sectors, we see when the steam engine was first created, how then, what happened is then you had these factories that can run 24 hours a day. In the past, before there was electricity and an engine, there's a limit to your production, because people can only work so hard, then they have to go to sleep. But then with the steam engine, you can just go. So then we see in England how very quickly, after the Industrial Revolution, how you then had children or people who were just working like 20 hours a day in a factory, like no rest, nothing, just working, just dying young. So then we see over the years now how the government has controlled that. They say, no, you have to give people, they can only work a certain amount of hours. If they want to work more, you have to pay them more. Like they're trying to they're trying to control it, because people who own businesses, especially those cruel-hearted people who have no compassion, they don't care. They will take whatever they want to get a bigger profit. And when they speak about what they do to the earth, they will frack our water, do all kinds of crazy things, poison it, they don't care. It's about the profit. So this profit is a very dangerous thing, and it has to be controlled by the Kshatriyas. And then we see that the labor class, naturally, they have to take shelter of the Vaishyas, and the Vaishyas then have to give them shelter and also give them a space. If you work for a boss, ultimately, that's what it means. A Sudra means you work for a boss. You have a boss that takes responsibility for you, and that boss is supposed to take care of you. And you hear of people, it's actually a very great privilege to have a nice boss. If you can have a boss, person who you work for, who's also actually a very nice person and takes care of you, then it's a very fortunate position to be in. So we see in this way, but it all depends ultimately on that brahmanas who are able to implement proper principles, religious principles. And then the Kshatriyas can do their business properly, and the Vaishyas can do their business properly, and most of society can live. So, but without those brahmanas that set those proper principles, then we see what's happening now in this world. No proper brahmanas, no people that are actually living according to proper principle who are guiding society. And therefore, so many things are happening that they can't stop it. They can't stop the exploitation of the weak by the strong, because there's no Brahminical people that are able to inspire the proper course of action and implement these principles. So Prabhupada explained that ISKCON is ultimately meant to create these two kinds of personalities, at least as a main aim. The one is the Brahmana, individuals who live according to very high principles, and then the Kshatriyas, who are strong enough to implement these principles, because real strength can only be achieved if one is living a principled life. So we see that the Kshatriyas, read about, if you look at the Mahabharata, these Kshatriyas were not just like bloodthirsty killers. Sometimes people think like that. They think, oh, I like to fight, so therefore I'm a Kshatriya. I always get into fights with devotees, so I'm just probably just a Kshatriya, because I just like to argue and fight. But that's not at all what it means. You see the Kshatriyas, you see they're also highly religious. You see Arjuna, even in the Mahabharata war, you see before they fought every morning, they would all do puja. So they would all sit, and most of them, they would do their meditation, they would do their prayers, do their puja. So the Kshatriyas they also have the sacred thread. They're highly religious, and that also brings them great strength. They all also follow the principles. The four regulative principles are not just for the Brahmanas. The four regulative principles are for any Aryan individual, for any person that is interested in living a high principled life. But the Kshatriyas, they just have more passion. They have that stronger strength that they then implement in protecting society. So, and what about the cows? Why are the cows so important? Well, the cows are so important because the cows are the only way by which one can live without violence. see that now there's a big movement in the world for, say, something like veganism, where people are saying that actually it's not necessary to drink milk or eat flesh. But that, unfortunately, is not true. Firstly, most vegan foods that we see today that are supposed to be substitutes for dairy products or animal products are all highly processed, factory-made stuff. A lot of it, mostly. A lot of factory-made stuff. We see also a lot of those things would be based on some form of protein, like say nuts or these things. But if you would actually go back to a culture in which people have to grow their own food in a local manner, then there's no way you can have a sustainable civilization without either eating meat or drinking dairy or using dairy products. Because the human being requires a certain kind of saturated fat to survive. In Ayurveda it is explained that different foods, when you eat something, that which you eat, it is digested and then it nourishes certain tissues that you have. So your body has all these various tissues, your muscle, your fat, your bone, your marrow, and then your reproductive tissue. And your body basically takes anything and it burns it, and it creates successively. It starts from the outside, starts from the flesh, starts from what they call the rasa, and then the flesh, the fat, the bone, the marrow, the reproductive fluid. And there are only certain foods that are powerful enough to create these deeper tissues, like your bone marrow and your reproductive fluid. For example, if you will only eat rice, or certain grains, these food, they don't have enough, they cannot nourish your deeper tissues. And therefore you see what happens in countries where people are malnourished. Where they, for example, only eat maize. Certain parts of Africa can't grow anything else. They don't have any, there's some famine, people are only eating grain. And they're only eating maize meal. And you get a disease called kwashiorkor, which means that you have total malnutrition of the deeper tissues. And then you see those little kids with the very small limbs and the protruding belly. You've seen them? So that's a disease that happens when they eat no fat. The only thing they can eat is just carbohydrates for extended periods of time, especially when they are young. And the body cannot actually feed its deeper tissues. So to feed these deeper tissues, you need to have fat. Prabhupada explains that we need the blood of the animal. That's like what we need to live. And you will be unable, even for example, if you buy any vegan milk, then you will see on that thing, it says, not suitable for infant feeding. You seen that? Soy milk, cashew milk, anything. It says not suitable for infant feeding. Why is that? Because if you take a child has a very specific nutritious needs, because the child basically doubles in size of body for those first few years, every year. It's like in a very quick span of time. So the child is growing very quickly, and the child is also, he is forming the basic substrate of his body, like his brain and his nervous tissue is growing. If you don't feed a child real milk, either cow milk or human milk, and you just feed him soy milk, you feed him cashew milk, then you see what will happen with that child. The child will die, most likely, or at least he will have severe nutritional deficiencies. Basically, his growth will be completely stunted. So the point is that we are actually dependent to a large part on saturated fat. And the only way in which you can eat that fat, that you need to grow and survive without killing animals, is by taking the milk of the cow. That's how the whole thing is designed, set up in such a way. Because we are basically designed to be dependent on the cows. That's the system, that's how the human body is designed. So the Prabhupada explains in his purports that drinking milk it nourishes the finer tissues of the brain. So that's where that comes from this Ayurvedic understanding of how the real subtle tissues of the body, specifically then the marrow of the bone, and then also the reproductive tissue, which is then used to this reproductive tissue, semen, is the way in which the body stores its energy. So if you look at the big problem in life, The big thing, for example, that made this device possible, the smartphone, what is the big thing that made it possible? Is increasing technology of batteries, the ability to store energy in a battery. It's a very tricky science to be able to store electricity, because the thing with electricity is that it always wants to move, and it always disappears very quickly. So to find ways in which to catch electricity and to store it, it's a very tricky thing. The same goes for all resources in this world. Water, sunlight. Every day the sun shines. If you do the calculation, the amount of energy that comes from the sun every day is enough to power a city for like 10 years or something. It's a ridiculous amount. I don't know what the numbers is, but the amount of sunlight is there. But what's the problem? How to catch that sunlight? That's the tricky thing. It's there, but how will you catch it and how will you store it? So similarly, every single day we can eat thousands and thousands of calories and proteins, all kinds of things. But what's the problem? How can you store it and catch it? How can you store and catch that nutrition and that energy in your body? Because you only use a certain amount every single day. So the reproductive tissue is the way in which the human body does that. So what you're doing, if you eat something, your body nourishes all these various tissues. And whatever is in reserve and excess above that, specifically of things that we eat like dairy products, your body takes that and it produces reproductive tissue that is then stored. And then your body, if that reproductive tissue isn't used, then your body uses that. It again digests that, and it uses that energy to again then feed the other various parts of the body. So the real basis of one's health and one's immune system and one's vitality is rooted in semen or in the reproductive tissue. That's how the body is able to catch and store energy in a very small amount. Ojas, yes. Ojas is not really. Ojas is the result of what happens when your body digests semen. So semen is the physical substance, and then ojas is the subtle energy that is released. Like you see, for example, like now you're awake, your body, there's a certain energy that is being released because you're conscious and you're aware. But that awareness depends on the physical thing that's burned. You can almost say it's like when you burn fire, there's heat and light. So ojas is that heat and light that is the result of burning semen. So we see that it's amazing how it all comes together. And this ability of humankind, or this strength, it is based on the blood of the animal. That's how we also live. That's how the material world, that's the rule of the material world. Jivo jivasya jivanam. One living being survives by eating another. But the cow is what makes it possible. If one has this relationship with the cow and takes care of the cow, then the cow is naturally designed to produce more milk than it needs. And then the human being can take that milk and basically in that way exit the cycle of the exploitation and the exploiter. That is the real trick of human life. Human life, animal life is all based on killing and being killed. That's the rule of animal life, and that's what animals do. And you can look, you can Google YouTube brutal nature, and then you see what wonderful videos you get there, and then you see what animals do to one another. That's what this world is for. That's how this world works. If you walk outside these doors, you will see the same thing happening. It's not exactly as brutal, but it's the same thing. It's humans that are eating one another. That's what they do. They eat one another. You see these people, they take people and they squeeze them 10, 12 hours a day. They take their bodies and they squeeze it. And they squeeze these people for all their time and energy, and that's how they make their money. And they don't care. So that is the natural world, a world in which one being lives by killing another in one form or size. So Brahmanical culture is the only way in which one can really successfully escape this cycle of exploiting and exploitation. And the Brahmanas and the cows, they're the central ingredients to make this possible, because they're the ones that implement Dharma, the principles of Dharma, and then also allow us a practical way in which to live these values to their fullest extent. And at the same time, as Prabhupada says, the third ingredient is the devotee. Why the devotee? Because the devotee is the individual that starts the whole process. Because the devotee starts by offering everything for Krishna's pleasure. And therefore, even in the material industrialized world, it is possible for the devotee to take the products of this world that might have even been produced by violence, and then at least offer them to a certain extent to Krishna and purify the result, and in this way take the things of this world and transform them into a spiritual energy by using them for Krishna's pleasure. And therefore we see that is the great purifying effect that at least the society has, ISKCON has on the broader society, is that it can allow people to purify the results of their work, even though we live in a contaminated society, and start the process of creating purity, purifying elements. It is the great magic of devotional service. And it's all, I mean, we see we ourselves are products of the society that come in, and we ourselves become purified by the fire of devotional service. So in this way, Prabhupada is urging us to understand how it all fits together. And for every single individual who is able to follow these 4 regulative principles and chant the 16 rounds, you are part of the revolution. It doesn't look so revolutionary, but that is the actual revolution. That shift, as we get more and more people that are able to adopt this principled way of life, that is how society will change. And everybody is making all kinds of complicated arrangements. Like I have a friend, he's studying agriculture and food security. And you have like genius people writing big theses on how to create agriculture and food security without everyone becoming vegetarian. You see, because that's the complicated part. If you can't stop eating the animals, then it becomes very complicated to create. But if you're willing to stop eating animals, the problem is solved. It's like then it's very simple, then the ecological crisis is over, the planet is saved, everything is fine. But because people are sinful, because they cannot abide by these principles, even if you are extremely intelligent and you have billions of dollars, you will never be able to solve the problem. So, as Prabhupada said, it is actually very simple, but it all depends on people being able to live according to these higher principles. And that higher principles are only possible when there is the ability to make sacrifice. And it is only possible to make a sacrifice if the heart is satisfied by the experience of performing devotional service. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that the tushti that comes, or the pushti, the pleasure that comes from performing devotional service, gives us the tushti, which means the satisfaction of the mind and heart. And that satisfaction is the basis upon which one can perform austerity. And that austerity is the basis upon which one can transform society. But in the absence of the satisfaction that comes from performing devotional service, one will be too addicted to sensual pleasure. And then even though we see that this is what's destroying the world, people will not be able to stop because they're just too attached to doing those exact things that are leading to the destruction of both themselves and the entire world. And in this way, as Prabhupada explained, he will go down, it says his society will go down as having saved humanity in its darkest hour. And as more and more people accept these principles, in 1,000 or 2,000 years from now, people look back, they will see that was the man who explained to us what needed to be done and actually saved society. Okay, it's 8:30 now. I won't be taking any questions because we have a big day ahead of us. Eat an early breakfast and be ready to depart for Philadelphia very soon. Grantarash Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Gaur Premanande.
Questions can be sent to Vilasa ISKCON.
That's it.
Oh, you got to email that.